Hey everyone, my guest today is Daisy Prince. Daisy is the director of the musical The Connector, currently that you can see at Manhattan Class Company in New York City. Some of her other directing credits include the original off-Broadway production of The Last 5 Years and the original off-Broadway production of Songs for a New World, both by Jason Robert Brown. Daisy's acting credits include the original Broadway production of Merrily We Roll Along, Follies in Concert, Pal Joey, The Petrified Prince, and she has been a featured performer with the New York Pops at Carnegie Hall. Her recordings include all the shows I just mentioned and Grateful, the songs of John Basie, how do you say his last name?
Bucchino.
Bucchino,
Bucchino. Yeah.
John Bucchino. In addition to directing and performing, she also produces plays and concert. And Daisy has spent 20 years teaching as part of the New York City faculty of Syracuse University's the Tepper semester. Her family, the Princes, are truly American theater royalty. And I am so happy to welcome this royal princess, Daisy Prince, to the podcast. Hello, old friend. Hello.
Hello. I'm thrilled to be here.
I am so thrilled to have you. This is now, I have managed to have the trifecta, Jonathan Mark Sherman and Jason Robert Brown, your co-conspirators in The Connector, have already been on the show. And so this has just been a delight planning this and knowing it was finally happened today. So we are going to get to The Connector, this glorious musical. One of its stars, Hannah Cruz, was just on this podcast, and my listeners will really get like a great deep dive into the story of that show from a performer's perspective. But I want to go back before we get to today to a little bit of you and your own sort of history of not just being part of a family that is just so deeply steeped in the arts, um, but not shying away from it and going, that's okay. I'm also going to do this thing that I love. Abigail Pogrebin was on the podcast talking about a book, but of course it segued into Merrily We Roll Along because you two were in it together. So let's go back in time. I want to actually let's do Merrily for a minute because it's having such a moment in its new version of it. What did that show mean to you? And go for Merrily.
Okay. Well, I mean, I think Merrily's slightly a slightly more peculiar experience was a more peculiar experience for me than other people. First of all, because I think to them they had sort of thought of my father and Steve as these kind of theater icons, and to me they were my dad and Steve. So it was different for me. It was not my sort of lifelong dream to get to work with them, even though I loved everything they did. And I spent my entire childhood listening. I often said if I write a book, um, it would be Someone in a Tree, because I really do feel like that's who I was, you know. But during Merrily, I was in high school. And being in high school, um, I was keenly aware of the things I was missing as much as the things I was getting. And
Can you
I
explain what you
also,
mean by that?
well, I'm a nerd and I love school. And I felt always like my life was sort of there were things in my life that were not normal and things that were very, very normal. And one of those was being part of a family that worked on a schedule. We were all home for dinner at night. It was much more typical of that kind of family life, a family of four. And then there were the other times that were extraordinary, mostly during the creative processes of these people. So during Merrily, specifically, I knew Merrily was happening because I knew Merrily was happening. And my father and Steve would work in our house in Mallorca in Spain. So he could be with us during the summers. So when we were free, we had family time, and he wasn't somewhere else. We would be all together. And so I knew it was happening and I really wanted to do it. And I loved performing. Um, so I auditioned. I was terrified. And it was the first time I sort of realized two things. One, you know, I lived in total fear of wandering around with a sort of nepotism, or the now newly coined Nepo baby label, following me, because I always wanted to think I earned things. And it was very hard for me at that age, at 16 years old, to handle sort of the barbs that were coming my way. That said, I remember it like you remember things in high school. They're through this sort of patina. They're all, my memories aren't as clear as anyone's, and I don't know what that is. But yeah, they're all sort of sepia toned and wonderful and not as painful. And I was happy to get back to school. And I also had the benefit of knowing certain things, that while, I had the benefit of knowing that my father and Steve were not at personal odds over this show, which I think was another sort of piece of misinformation that trailed along after the show. Yes, it did mark the end of their sort of huge body of work together, right? But no, they were always a part of each other's lives and friends. So it wasn't quite as dramatic as maybe it was made out to be. So yeah, Merrily. And I have to say, I think it's extraordinary. I loved it then. I love it now. The fact that it has this life is incredible. I thought I went and saw it. I sobbed through the entire thing. Pretty much. And I just marveled at how a lot of my life and a lot of my childhood, especially starting with Company, which I don't remember the show, but I remember it happening. And Follies was the first show I saw and remember. But I do remember my entire childhood, these musicals that I loved and adored, and casts that would sort of include me, because, I was sort of a mascot child. And I remember the morning after opening, the reviews coming out, and what the almost predictable, negative criticism did to sort of, the bubble that had been created, or at the very least, their sort of optimism that the shows would work out. And in the case of Merrily, I was very well prepared, because I'd been around it my entire life, for Merrily to open and get bad reviews. And I think that's the thing that none of the other people in the show were sort of prepared for emotionally.
Right.
Because I think people don't know that. I don't think they remember that. I mean, I think people, I mean, some people do, but I think a lot of people don't remember how poorly the original shows my father and Steve did were received in the media. So I was prepared in a way other people weren't.
When you think back to sort of being in those rooms at and having like eyes and ears and backstage and getting to watch rehearsal, things that like maybe still stick with you to this day as a director, from watching your dad and all these incredible artists working together. Are there things, because I really want to get into all of these, like, it's funny, I look at your resume and it's like, it feels like you've directed 1 million things, but actually it's like you've directed a few of the most important pieces of theater of my life. And so I confuse that with like multitudes, when actually it's like laser focused on exactly what I needed at every moment of my life. So God bless you for that. And your dad sort of did the same. So can you talk a little bit about things that you think you bring into a room as a director that are impacted in that way by him?
Well, yeah. I mean, I think first of all, to address sort of right away, the idea of sort of getting into directing was not my original intention. I didn't know exactly what I wanted to do. And I took a year off from college and I performed. I went back to college, and Paula Vogel had started teaching there. And Paula said, why don't you try directing some of these new plays? And I said, Oh God, that sounds like a horrible idea, but I kind of want to. So I did. And so if blame is to be placed anywhere, blame or encouragement, both of them, depending on
Yes.
whether anybody thinks I'm doing anything of value, a lot of that credit does go to Paula as well,
Mm-hmm.
because she gave me a gentle shove. But I think, I was incredibly lucky to be able to do a lot of listening and a lot of watching. And all of the backers auditions for the original shows were done in our living room and recorded on reel to reel tapes. And my brother and I, we would sit at the top of the stairs in our pajamas and sort of slide down as far as we could get without being seen, so that we could listen. And so I think I was able to absorb a lot about story and structure,
Mm-hmm.
and it defined a lot of my taste. And I also, the other opportunities I was given, because I've been incredibly privileged, and I want to acknowledge that, because it's rare. I had an incredible parent too, um, and that, and my, I have an incredible mom who's still alive and with us and brilliant, and her life was, if anything, even more kind of extraordinary than my father's. But the sort of net effect of everything that was put into me also was I got to see great directors all over the world. So I
Yeah.
got to see Ariam Mnouchkine, I got to see Peter Stein, I got to see Tadeusz Kantor, I got to see all of these incredible, what were thought of as sort of avant-garde directors. But to me, I don't really sort of make that distinction very much. But they were in languages I didn't understand. But I knew the story and I got them, and it was kind of like being at the opera. And so they also exposed me to all of that.
Right.
And being exposed to that much culture um, from a very early age. I mean, the age where people would be like shooting my mother glances at sort of the things that she was taking young children to. Um, but thank God for it, because all of that, all of what I respect very much and I value very much, and I never take for granted all of what was put into me. And and that's, so yeah, I am influenced by him for a million different reasons. We love a lot of the same things. Um and I think also the idea that the art you make um should feel important to you. You shouldn't be afraid to make something that might be unpopular, dangerous, new, um, and that you should forge your own path, and that the people who get it will get it, and the people who won't get it definitely won't get it, and that has to be okay. You can't make art for everyone. And, so there was a lot. Also, you have to see the production. The biggest thing he said to me about directing um, was, if you can't see it, you can't really direct it. And it has to do with sort of finding the visual metaphor and having a sense of how the show should move, how it should look, how it should function before you get into the room. So, yeah, there are those sorts of things.
It's funny that you mention your mom, because in, reading all about you in recent weeks, her father, like Saul Chaplin, I mean, if you use Wikipedia to see all of the movies that he composed or arranged, like, can you just run off a few of the titles just so people at home are like, what?
Well, at first, I mean, here's the thing. There's sort of two levels going on with my mom's life. There's the Metro Goldwyn Mayer part of it, the golden age of movie musicals.
Right.
And that's her father, Saul Chaplin. And he was oh gosh, the number of musicals. Summer Stock American in Paris. He was one of the executive producers. He was the executive producer of West Side Story, Sound of Music. And also on the music team for all this. That was what he did. So he was very much embedded in that world. He also worked at the Cotton Club. That was sort of one of his first musical jobs. And he toured with the USO and Frank Sinatra and all these people. So he had a different sort of path. And then there's another path that came through my grandmother and my step grandfather, we are the only children from that
Okay.
relation. My mother is the only child, and he was an actor, and he was blacklisted during the McCarthy era.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a whole other thing that happened, and a whole other kind of life that my mother lived.
And your husband's last name being the same as
Mhm.
that's coincidence, or are you distant
We
relatives, or?
chose it. We chose it. When we were getting married,
Yeah.
I think everybody goes through that period where they're thinking, what name am I using? What name am I using? And we went through all of the family names, and we sort of landed on that one. My grandfather wasn't doing so well at the time,
Mm.
and we thought if we could tell him before he died, he'd probably be really happy. And he was. So that's it. We chose the name when we got married. He'd already been working under another name. Like, we really did choose it when we got married.
You know what? You don't need a little known fact at the end now, because I had no idea that it's not coincidence that they have the same
No,
name. It's actually the same name.
it's the same name.
So
The same name.
you and Jason Robert Brown together,
Hmm.
and this time including the great Jonathan Mark Sherman, have just created these pieces of theater that are such touchstones for people. Um, Starting with Songs for a New World. How
Hmm.
did you meet Jason, and how did that particular piece that lives vibrantly in our hearts and minds, how did that begin?
Well, I met Jason when he was 20 years old, and he had just come here. He had gone to Eastman and had dropped out of Eastman, and went off to teach in Florida at New World School of the Arts, and then sort of made the brave move to New York, and he was playing in piano bars, and I was frequenting piano bars because they were the most fun. Um, and while he was playing in piano bars, there was a group that came in, a vocal group, and they needed someone to play for them. And I heard them on their first day, and Jason heard them on their first day. So he went to work with them, and I met him through them. And then a friend, Annie Hughes, said, it was really late, like 4 a.m, at a place called 88's. Miss you, 88 so much. But at 88's, and he was playing downstairs, and there was no one there. And she said, why don't you play her a song that you wrote? And he played me a song that ended up being in Songs for a New World, called The Flag Maker. And I thought, what 20-year-old writes this song? How does that happen? So he was putting together like a little sort of concert, like a review of his shows in the upstairs space, in this small little cabaret space. And I went and I heard more songs, and he heard me sort of giving advice to people, or mouthing off, or doing whatever I was doing. And he said, she seems like maybe she could do this gig. And that's how it all started. We decided to put together something. Um, we knew the Maltby and Shire work,
Mm-hmm.
and it sort of seemed like a good idea at the time, just to craft a show that would be an introduction to a composer as well, not just a compendium of shows that are of songs that are sort of pulled from other shows, but
Right.
an introduction to a new young composer. And that's sort of how that all came about.
Wow. I mean, to see it a few years ago at City Center, and just to be in the presence of people who have loved it since its first uh incarnation, and
Mm-hmm.
then for a new generation to find it and to have those people seated next to each other, it was so powerful.
I was sitting behind Jessica Molaskey. That's when I went, and Jess, who was in it and who's also in the connector, we were just amazed, because it's somewhat miraculous what happened with Songs for a New World. I mean, we did it at the WPA Theater, which doesn't exist anymore,
Mm-hmm.
and was wonderful. And Kyle Rennick and Laurie Sherman had tremendous faith in us, and were terrific, and let us do it. And we ran for 3 weeks, I think, and the houses weren't full, but there were some amazing people there. One of our biggest fans was Jonathan Mark Sherman.
Mm-hmm.
He came to it a lot. I would say he I don't know how many times he saw it, but quite a few. And so I honestly believe it became very important to us that the album be made. And I think had that album not been made, it would have just disappeared, vanished off the face
That's
of the
right.
earth,
That's
you
right.
know?
But it got into the hands of lovers of musical theater and then everyone who wants to perform musical
Hmm.
theater. And that kind of explosion of
Hmm.
fan and artist interpretation. I mean, it just goes and goes and goes. And then the next collab that became really well known is The Last 5 Years, which if you are of our generation,
Hmm.
it really was like it was an unprecedented sort of way to tell a story through musical theater. And it is, in talking to Norbert, who
Hmm.
has been on the show, and others, and Sherry, it really was formed in many ways in the rehearsal room. The
Hmm.
songs were there, and then everyone has talked about who's worked with you. Daisy Prince creates a room where you are just so unself-conscious about trying things. It's an incredible skill for someone to feel like they can fail in front of the person who has just hired them. What, I mean, I think Lauren Kennedy was the original
Yes, she was.
Kathy,
She was in
right?
Skokie, Illinois. Yeah. We did it in
Yes.
Skokie, Illinois
Yes. For people
at
who don't
Northlight
know,
Theater.
most
Hmm.
people know the recordings that they know, but
Yeah.
I think it was built on Lauren and Norbert, and
Hmm.
then it became. When you think back to that and how you and Jason worked on that together and how you worked on the Connector, this most recent
Hmm.
project, does it feel like a seamless transition, or do you guys feel like you work differently now that you're
I would say
wizened in certain ways?
I would say it's like the most comfortable collaboration based on a million years of friendship, deep, deep trust, and a sense that we're always working toward making the same show. And I think the singularity of purpose helps us when we're in the rehearsal room, because the idea is you have to trust the other person um, to help craft the show into this vision that you both have, right? And so it's incredibly easy to work with Jason for me. It's a pleasure. Um, and this feels like a continuation. But again, this is the people in this show are people who are more our age. Um, and the people who were in Last 5 Years were much closer to our age at that time. So in that way, there could sort of be, you could see sort of a direct line, if you wanted to,
Yeah.
being drawn between these three shows. But also there are things, it's when you find somebody that who shares your taste, um, it's really kind of a remarkable thing,
Hmm.
and wants to make the same kind of theater you want to make. Um, it's really special. So that's, it's a great gift.
I just need people to understand Daisy, by the way, has a gorgeous voice and is a wonderful actress. And I could have seen you performing Kathy in the last 5 years just as easily as directing it. Is there, and you do I mean, you still sing, and there are
I
opportunities
don't
for you
sing
to
as
do it.
often now.
It's less.
Um, yeah, I mean, I still can, but
Hmm.
of course, the kids these days are like, I mean, there's no comparison. They're sort of their gifts are off the charts. They're training from the time that they're 3.
Yeah.
They're just brilliant.
Yeah. It's a new
So
world, Golda.
it
It's a new
is.
world. Yes.
It fully is. But also you have to be a very specific kind of person to do 8 shows a week. It's an incredible thing, and I have tremendous admiration for it, and I would not be good at it. I loved when I was doing limited runs because I thought this I can commit to.
That suits
But
you and your
yeah,
lifestyle. Yeah.
and also and also sort of how I've got a very busy brain,
Hmm.
for better or worse, most of the time for worse. But it's hard to fashion your life around it seems like it would be easy. It's incredibly difficult, as you know.
But a busy brain is great for directing because it means you can hold a lot of ideas at once and enjoy sort of conducting all of the different,
Mhm.
departments and collaborating. I mean, obviously you love to collaborate, and that, if we get to The Connector, the play that the musical, it feels like a play. That's what's kind of thrilling about it. It really is, it is when you talked about sort of the visual, how important it is to you
Mhm.
to sort of be able, and sort of that credo of like seeing it.
Mhm.
There
Mhm.
is there's a tremendous feeling of like place. Like we get into this theater and it's abstract, right? It's not a naturalistic, this is not a naturalistic kitchen sink drama, but there are enough like set pieces and
Mhm.
touchstones. So like we know where we are. And then all your designers got to just be free to
Mhm.
create what, so it's a very cool space. It's very modern. It feels very modern at the same time. But can you just talk a little bit about um like what is The Connector to you? Why did you want to tell this story? And what is your hope for audiences to take away from it? And yeah, I would just love,
Okay.
I loved it. I just love to know why you love it.
Okay, well, the connector, first of all, it represents a lot more than just this show to me. And I think I say this a lot, and it often goes sort of unnoticed, but I had to leave directing for a period of time. And I wanted to do this show as the next project Jason and I were going to do 20 years ago after the last 5 years. So that's a long time with this sort of passion project in mind. And and then I wasn't able to work really. I have a daughter. If you saw How to Dance in Ohio, or if you know anything about the movie of How to Dance in Ohio, it's dedicated to my older daughter who is autistic and nonverbal. And at the time when I had her, we had to sort of make a school and do all of this stuff. And I tried to dabble, which I did a little bit, but I wasn't really able to do it. By the time I sort of figured things out and
Hmm.
had everything at home managed, I thought, well, I mean, here's the deal. Middle-aged women coming back into the workforce is an issue. And it doesn't matter if you're an artist or you are a person who, wants to work in the field of business. It's not easy. And for that, I also have been incredibly privileged because Jason has hung on to this. For me, the connector was about I really became obsessed after I saw an interview with Stephen Glass on 60 Minutes. And and I was much less interested in sort of sociopathy, really, and much more interested in all the rest of what goes around it, like all the support systems, the sort of scaffolding that holds all of that up. And so I started researching other stories. Um, and I got more and more in the weeds and more confused because there were writers like Janet Cook. Janet Cook wrote this incredible series of articles, won the Pulitzer Prize for them. There were articles called Jimmy's World. Um, they were in the Washington Post. The gatekeeper at the Washington Post, the person who was supposed to make sure everything was going well, the editor in chief was Bob Woodward. And this happened under his watch. And he did not really pay the freight for this at all. The only person who paid the freight for it was Janet Cook, who also happened to be a terrific writer. And that was confusing as well. Like, what is there redemption in this? Are these stories, are these great writers who just, some of them got steered in the wrong direction and some of them were just, you know, living in a delusional world of their own or having some sense of mental illness that led them in one direction where their psyche was fragile enough that any suggestion that was made took them off the rails. So I sort of just kept looking and looking and looking, and it felt really important to me to tell the story. But I thought by the time we got to tell it, it would be irrelevant
Right,
because there's the internet, and surely if you can fact check yourself at home,
right.
that's going to make that's going to make objective truth this very easy thing. Objective fact, easy. Google.
Right.
You know, I didn't take into account a whole lot of other stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And so the story, I think, became much more complicated as and much more relevant, oddly, as time
Yeah.
went on. So it happened in the right time. But yeah.
For people, you know, probably Hannah Cruz's episode will air before this. So for my
Mm-hmm,
listeners, they'll have a sense of the story.
mm-hmm,
You know, just simply put, there's someone who shows up at, you know, a magazine in the
mm-hmm,
90s, and his stories are getting published right and left by the editor because they're just so fantastic. And so two things are going on. One, there's been a young copywriter there, a female, who we know as soon as we meet her, she's super talented. And we just know because
mm-hmm,
she's kind of an archetype in the world. And we see her being passed over for this new shiny young, you know,
mm-hmm,
boy who comes in. And then we find out that, you know, as Daisy, you know, cited other people in the real world who were called out for publishing things that weren't true, it sort of unravels. And so for me, what was really powerful, I actually saw Jonathan and you guys after the show. I was like, wow, someone wrote a musical for our daughters, right? Like just this idea, there's the idea of fake news and all of
mm-hmm,
these catchphrases that became really popular in the two elections
mm-hmm.
ago.
Right.
Um, but there's also this idea of, you know, really thinking about and questioning how much, I mean, I think things have changed. We have women, we have friends who are working in all
Mm-hmm,
sorts of business places, and they are boss ladies, and they aren't, you know, constantly looked over in the way that it was so specific to the magazine
mm-hmm.
world in the 90s. And
Yeah.
yet my extraordinary niece, who's a doctor, is the patient asks for her to go get the doctor. They assume she's the nurse, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, there's
Right.
ways there, and she's
Right.
like, it says doctor right on her coat, but there's still this idea of sort of who women are and who men are, and we have a lot of work to do.
Mm-hmm,
For you at the center of it, I feel like those are two very powerful themes in this show. One
mm-hmm,
is this sort of what's real, what's truth, what's fact. Does it even matter at this point?
mm-hmm,
If you think it does, this show will really matter to you. If you don't
mm-hmm,
care, maybe the connector isn't for you. I can't say who that is. Maybe there's someone
mm-hmm,
who doesn't care. And now we have AI coming into our lives,
mm-hmm.
and it just continues. But I want to talk about that for a moment because it's two really powerful themes working together.
I think for me, I think the decision to do it in '96 was pretty clear, and it happened for a lot of reasons. It was
Mhm.
it you know, trying to find the inflection point, because we're not a show that's trying to be a mystery about a fabulist. We're not we say at the very beginning, you know, at the very beginning what happens to the magazine. It's the first sentence of the show. So the idea that we're trying somehow to unspool this great mystery is actually, we tell you right away, that's not the point. The point is, how does this happen? And oddly, some people are like, well, it's implausible that it would happen under the watch of somebody if he was really a smart editor. And you're like, what are you talking about? It's happened at every major newspaper, every major magazine, and in every news outlet. So it was about sort of what was the inflection point, and that inflection point was, for us in our storytelling, we felt the sort of explosion of the internet, right? Where youth culture became much more important because they knew how to use it, and older generations were afraid of technology. Okay, so right away, the younger the person, the more able they are to interact with a world that's more challenging for older people.
Right.
Then there was also the idea of corporate America buying up news outlets, and the fact that that is now sort of ignored, and is understood to be a fact. But at the time, it's kind of scary, the idea that a sort of capitalist entity would be in charge of the dissemination of really important information. And that also started to happen. It happened a little earlier than that, I would say, back when, you know, William Shawn was at the New Yorker, and that whole story about how he was, told when the corporation came in that he would be allowed to retire when he wanted to retire, and he could sort of appoint the person who was coming after him, and then none of that happened. The corporation just took over. So we also dabble in the issues of sort of what happens when you reach a certain age in your industry, and in this case, the editor-in-chief has reached that age, and he's bumping up against a lot of things that would say to him, your time is running out at this magazine. And so that's also really important. And also just the easy dismissal. It's like, and it's that way in medicine a lot. It's funny you brought up medicine, because most women you talk to of any age will say that they go to a doctor with a very reasonable physical complaint, and they're told that they're having anxiety. They need some sleep. They're having anxiety. They need to calm down, right?
Right.
And women's health very much lies in this. It's in jeopardy all the time, because we're constantly fighting to be taken seriously. So I think this also, giving warnings. Obviously, it's as old as Cassandra. There's a song called Cassandra, and it's an old story. Women issuing warnings to a lot of men who don't listen. And it even happened recently. I don't know if you read that article about all of the women at the border in Gaza who are sending back information and dispatches saying something is going on, and they didn't listen because they were women.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's a lot there's a lot of this that's still true. And that's the part that hits the deepest to me, is the idea that what we have to do to be heard and to be acknowledged is sometimes insurmountable, and sometimes people give up.
It's exhausting.
Mm-hmm.
It's
Right?
exhausting. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Well, it really is. I just need you to know that within all these themes, it's also so highly entertaining. And
I'm glad you said that. Yeah, because it's really funny.
It
really
funny.
is funny.
And you have just such talented people making every character, whether they're sort of meant to be the bad guy or the good guy, they're all people. You've really created full-blooded, nuanced, complicated people who come to their decisions sometimes out of fear, and sometimes just because they're misguided. And it is really fun to be in a new Jason Robert Brown, Jonathan Mark Sherman. Daisy, do you have a middle name? Prince? Because I
know everybody had, when we were doing last 5 years, everybody had 3 names. I was like the only person. I looked at the poster the other day, and I was like, wow, I'm just dangling here with these 2 names. I don't have a middle name. I don't have one.
Do you want to choose one? My mother didn't have one. And she ended up choosing her middle name. It wasn't like done a lot in Brooklyn in her day.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I could be Daisy Prince Chaplin, because that's the name I am when I'm with my kids. So I think that does happen. But I did sort of want to keep my original name for work, because, wanted to keep it.
Why not? It's yours.
Yeah, it's fine.
Yeah.
And it's what I started with. And so to honor this sort of the fact that there was a break in continuity, I really want to keep it. When you asked about like what I want people to leave with, I want people to leave asking questions more than feeling confirmed in their own feeling, right? Like wandering away from this saying, okay, so now we know how this happens. What does this mean in terms of our lives now? Is there a warning bell being rung that we're not aware of? Or are we just sort of seeing how insidious this thing is? So that you talked about AI. That's a great topic to bring up when you're talking about this show. And it's really sort of that, to expand the conversation about it, so that it's not just, and also I want to be very clear, this is not a story that has a political bent to it, even though I am a wildly political human, and it's my other great love. There's no blame assignation on one side, because that would not be real. Because the truth is, we could name right now fantastic reporters considered liberal who fabricated stories, parts of, and our whole stories. And a lot of them are still reporting, and a lot of them still are in positions of power. So it's about the discourse. It's about opening up the discourse. And it's also about understanding the danger of belief, right? And how the fact that we've become a culture of belief means that nothing actually has to be true, because you can believe in Santa, you can believe in fairies, you can believe that you're right all the time, you can believe that you're being lied to by anybody. Belief used as a substitution for objective fact, that's the scary part. And that's something that I think we all have to talk about, is where, how we address this going forward. And if we address it going forward, then whose responsibility is it to address it?
You know, I have one more kind of creative question, which is you and Jason, you know, on the last 5 years and Songs for a New World collaborated together, but Jason was sort of, you know, the title, even though I know you had so much input, was, you know, lyrics, book, you know, Jason doing all the words and all the music. And this time, you know, Jonathan is the book writer. So can you talk a little bit about, for Jason, who is used to kind of doing both, he's collaborated on lots of different shows and Parade with Alfred, etc. Talk to me about sort of what it is, the three of you. How does it not like slip into just you guys dying with laughter? How are you able to keep everyone on track? Because you're all, I mean, very funny people and love to laugh. Yeah,
I have to be real and say to you that it does a lot. A lot of the time it devolves into peals of laughter. Our text thread is probably something that should send us to a shrink's office immediately. But I think it's all working toward the same purpose, right? Sherm came on a little bit later when Jason was like, I can't do this. This is bad what I'm writing for a book. And we realized, okay, well, we have this friend who's right in front of us, and it's entirely in his wheelhouse. It is fully his milieu. So like, what are we doing? This is the easiest call we could ever make. And so, and as of the moment we added Sherm, you know, it's fun to work on a musical with outsourced material. It's really fun. It's like putting together a puzzle, and we all love puzzles. And so it's, you know, for us, as we're going through drafts and as we're rewriting it, it's like, what stories do we want to tell? What stories don't we want to tell? Do we want to include this that is traditional to a musical, or do we want to say, you know what, we don't need this? You know, so it was highly collaborative. It was really fun. And I think you can feel the fun in it, despite the fact that the set, you know, is very abstract and that it deals with topics that are very serious. I think you can feel the joy while you're watching it.
Yeah. And it's really fun to see Scott Bakula back on stage. It's really cool. It's really cool.
He's like the most naturally charming, intelligent, open.
But where did that come from? I mean, it's like, what? This is amazing. How did that happen?
How all of this happen? Well, first of all, this will let you know how behind the times I am.
You took out your player's guide.
I knew about romance, right? So I always knew that he could sing. Like, I didn't know that he was on this big show called Quantum Leap, which is humiliating. I'm not proud of this.
She said it out loud, my friend.
I did not know.
Got it.
I did not know.
Yeah.
So I didn't know he was also on Star Trek. I did not know. So I missed a lot. And when we were talking about casting this, really Bernie Telsey made a list, and we were like, I mean, would Scott Bakula want to come back and do this? And when the answer turned out like within a day to be yes,
that's incredible.
We were all just astounded and thrilled, and thought, well, maybe we're on to something.
Yeah, but how great that must have felt totally like this script.
Incredible.
This script is great, even when we're not reading it to people. You know, at the beginning, you're like, let me read it to you, because you might not get it. But the
But
idea
really
that,
incredible.
yeah, that's wonderful. Well, it is, that is a joyous cast. That is a joyous production. I'm so thrilled that I got to talk to you about it today. I want to let you
Me
go
too.
so you can go see your glorious company. And before I let you go, I just have one question. Is there a little known fact that you can share?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Okay. So I'm obsessed with geography and travel. And I don't get to do it half as often as I want to do it. But, and I can recommend this to everybody. I go on Google Maps and I pin a place that I don't think I'm ever going to get to visit in my life. Like places like I've been through Eritrea, I've been on Kiribati, I've actually been like at Nuuk, which is the capital of Greenland, and I drop a pin and I walk around virtually just to see it. Even if I'm not seeing it, I'm seeing it. I look at what their hotels are like. I look at what their houses are like, what restaurants look like. If there are places that you can stay, if they are getting tremendous, if it's places that like, can you see the effects of relief aid? Like all kinds of stuff. And
Wow.
so that's my little known fact. I highly recommend
I
It's
love that.
Crazy Habit
I
because it's
love it. All
highly
right.
enjoyable.
I am going to look forward to virtually traveling with you. This seems like an amazing way to spend our time together. Daisy, Prince, thank you for being on the podcast today. What a thrill
Thank
to get you
you.
here. Yay.
Thank
Have a
you
great
so
day.
much.
Oh my
You
God.
too.
Hang on one sec.
Yeah.